Hi, party people. This is Olori Bola, founder of Nora Labs, Nora Press, and Nora Fest, bringing you another edition of Black Genius with one of my favorite geniuses, somebody who I had to beg to get on this show because she's too humble. A lot of the Black geniuses are very humble and don't think that they're geniuses, but you're going to find out just how amazing and glorious Desiree Gordon of the Brooklyn Arts Council. She is a cultural strategist. She's a healing artist. She has nurtured power lines. I'm going to give you a proper bio. So she's a multidisciplinary healing artist, curator, and cultural strategist from Antigua. She's a heart-centered leader, has cultivated pipelines to power and nourished ecosystems of care at the Studio Museum in Harlem, Brooklyn Museum, the Caribbean Cultural Center, African Diaspora Institute, and now she's at the Brooklyn Arts Council. The Smithsonian Institute recognized her work by awarding her a Reimagining the Museum Fellowship. At the Brooklyn Arts Council, she's designed the organization's first social justice investment strategy, established a hybrid digital wellness platform as a social equity initiative, and established the Brooklyn Innovation Institute. And I'm very proud that we're working together on the digital engagement portal, which is going to change the way that artists find work and opportunities. So please snap your fingers and stomp your feet and help me welcome Desiree Gordon to Black Genius.
Oh, thank you so much for letting me be here. Thank you so much for shining your amazing bright light of genius on the world. Thank you so much for having conversations, thoughtful conversations with folk who are just trying to do good things.
Thank you. Thank you for doing all the amazing, great things that you do. I know that, we haven't, we didn't do a lot of like interview prep and practice, and this is just going to be really laid
That's okay.
back. And, I want you to just kick back and we're just going to share with the people some of your journey. So, first and foremost, you're from Antigua, and, Antigua and Brooklyn, or Brooklyn by way of Antigua. And, very few like you were telling me last week, there's a small number of Antiguans, especially in powerful positions. And so when you see each other in these positions, you recognize each other. I want you to tell the people a little bit about Antigua, growing up there, and your childhood between there and Brooklyn.
Sure. I want to say that Antiguans, like any place, you've got folk of all ilks, and actually Antiguans are quite numerous in their positions quietly as it's kept. Antigua is a tiny place or a powerful place. I tell people when you're dealing with Antiguans, you're dealing with quality. Um, Perhaps not quantity, but quality. There are very few of us, so about 120,000 people on the island at this time. Um, Primarily one of those places in the Caribbean where you had primarily Black African people as a predominant population for a very long time. We didn't have indentured Indians like you had in Trinidad. We didn't have lots of Chinese population like you have in Jamaica. A lot of Black Africans. So it's been had been a very homogenous population for a really long time, um, and we now have an influx of people from all over the Caribbean and even a couple of other places. And so the country, the culture, the voice is in a space of transition. It's at an inflection point, and it's a really interesting thing to see. As we also come into a certain level of maturity as an independent state, we got independence in 1981, so rather late, right? So there's still those growing pains that are happening for the country.
So were you born in Antigua or born in Brooklyn?
Sure, I was born in Antigua, born in my grandmother's house, caught by my
Mm,
aunt at the dawn, just before we bring the sun.
nice, nice. And so how
And
old were you landed in Brooklyn?
sure, actually, we were brought first to the Bronx, to Mount Vernon, to the Bronx. And so, this idea of, I always talk about immigration is one thing, being a child immigrant is has a nuance to it, because whereas as an adult, a person exacts a certain amount of agency, as a child, you sort of find yourself in this new place. And you sort of embedded this, in a way, there's a seed that's planted in you because you have to make meaning, right? Very often, I think lots of immigrant families, lots of immigrant children will say no one told them, no one explained them, they were brought along, and then you had to derive your own understandings. And for me, that having a sort of very lush internal life I imagined my way to understandings and remembered my way to understandings and held a lot of space for where I come from, where I was.
Mm,
And it's like, again, you'll hear lots of immigrant people speak about multiple tongues and multiple visions and multiple understandings. I think that's a core, that experience, that foundational experience is core to my intersectional approach to creativity, to work, to parenting,
mm,
um,
mm.
to relationships. I see things at the intersections, and it's a beautiful place.
That's so powerful. So you started out in the Bronx,
Mhm.
and you had this journey of making your own place in the world and making meaning of these new realities and transitioning. How old were you when you came to the Bronx?
I turned 5 here in
Wow,
America. Yeah,
wow.
turned 5.
Okay,
We went home almost every summer, and I think that was also critical. Um, but we came. I've been here since I've been about 5.
wow.
Catholic school,
You said Catholic school.
Catholic school. You know, we came to also what was a very largely immigrant population. I know I've heard people tell stories of coming and being like the only such and such kind of family where they were. We had lots of working class immigrant people all around. I tell people I didn't have an American friend till college. All my friends came from other immigrant families as well: Puerto Rico, Jamaica, Barbados, Italy, all of
What
that.
part of the Bronx was this?
This is the North Bronx, so up by like Baychester, White Plains Road, that kind of area there. I went to a St. Francis of Rome school for elementary school, PS 11 first, St.
Mm,
Francis of Rome, and Cardinal Stone High School.
wow. So, what were some of the moments that shaped you as a child in the Bronx that you believe kind of set you on the trajectory to doing the work that you're doing now? Were there moments where you were kind of struck by experiences that made you say, I'm curious about that. I want to explore that more. I want to do something about that.
Hmm. I think maybe there are a couple of instances. I remember when there was another new child in class, maybe second grade, and this new child was from Nigeria. His name was Yomi, and that's the part of his name we were given. And I remember feeling like me and him have something in common. We had a similar kind of demeanor, um, and I was one of the first. I'm curious about where he comes from too. I remember my mother buying me a tape recorder, a voice recorder, and I press play or press record, didn't know what to say, and I called out before I stopped it, "Mommy, I don't know what to say, what to say." And I said it just like that, "Mommy, what to say?" And at that moment when I heard that played back, I realized I had an accent, and I liked it, and I determined to keep it. I liked that about me. So there's this idea of being curious about other folks' stories, and also really cherishing the distinctions in my own story. Um, I think that wherever we went, I was always in the choir. I was always singing. And so music became a really sort of healing tool for me before I even had language to call it that, right? We were here, but I really wanted to be at home. And so music was a way to transport in that way. I always think, even now, I think about sound as space, this vibrating energy and how it can shift conditions and awarenesses, to shift place in a certain way. So having it's become a technology for me to be able to travel home in and out of sound, travel home to the places that are safe in myself, to the places where I am seen, where I am recognized inside myself, and to get to others as well. There's so many stories. Uh, Writing letters.
Add pastor to your name, the way you just, you're giving us the gospel right here. So I know, and I've heard Desiree sing, and I've seen some of the sound art. Well, I've seen some of the accompanying visual art that comes with the sound art, and I just really cannot wait for the world to hear more of your sound and feel that vibration. So yes, you are a musical being, a musical creative, and you're creative in so many different realms. And somehow you decided to channel that creativity into institution building.
Sure.
And so you went to college, you went to Yale. I want you to talk a little bit about the transition from, you were in the Bronx when you started college?
Yes.
Okay, so talk a little bit about the transition from the Bronx to Yale and deciding on what you wanted to study and how that now, projected you into social development and social innovation.
Sure. I think that there's so much about that moment, that transition from the Bronx to Yale space that has been so instructive in my life. People sometimes people go, "Oh, that's Des from Yale." It's like, no, this is Des from Antigua. This is
Mhm.
Des from the Bronx. I'm not from here. I happen to have passed through that place, and I'm glad I did, and I took all the things at that time. One thing I think was really important is when we're occupying certain spaces, we have strategy is really important. Understanding the strategy of that space is really important. Understanding that if you function again with distinction, right? If the way that you speak is not necessarily the mode of the dominant, if the way that you dream is not necessarily the mode of the dominant, if the way you present is not necessarily the mode of the dominant, it's super important, whether you're an immigrant person, a working class person, um, a healing person, that you understand that as your tool, as your treasure. And I think so my transition from the Bronx to Yale included a fair amount of silencing, or my sort of accepting a certain amount of silencing, and then having to do the work to sort of recognize that the things that were being silenced were um, actually that was happening to them because they were threatening what was the status quo. Like, what is this girl doing here with these locks and wearing that and not this, and expressing her ideas in these kinds of metaphors? And it seems so amazing. If we legitimize that, it causes us to question the legitimacy of our own sort of genius. And the problem there is that none of the geniuses need to be questioned. All of them need to come together, right? And but I think I was not met with that, and I didn't have the language or analysis at the time to understand that I was being silenced, not because I wasn't good enough, but because they didn't know, they couldn't box it. um, and I'm super grateful also for the people who went, "Hey, don't let them do that to you. Hey, we see you. Hey, bring that. Hey, do that." And I think part of why I'm very passionate about professional development now, I'm very passionate about mentorship, I'm very passionate about telling young people or emerging people, inspiring and affirming, and asset thinking, right? And really uh, working with people respectfully. Even that comes into like community engagement. So, like, okay, I may or may not understand, I may or may not share your experience, but my approach to this sort of point of connection is going to be affirming. It's going to be connect. We're going to in leadership that invites other perspectives, leadership that assumes your leadership, right? I think all of that experience at Brooklyn, excuse me, at Yale, and experience even as an immigrant child, um, sort of position my heart, position my thinking to see others and to invite others to show themselves, to invite others to show their own particular brilliance, and requires me to respect it. I see you.
So my other computer appears to have crashed. Can you hear me? So
Look at you
it's
on the ready, on the ready.
huh?
You see, look at
You know
you.
what? It's a good thing I had. It's literally not even responding. It's a good thing I had this other backup ready to go. So I missed a little bit of what you said, but you were talking about, not recognizing that your voice, the silencing of your voice and of your power, was not because you were not good enough, but because it was threatening to the established order.
That's
And
right.
that was where we started to freeze a bit. So if you could just,
Sure. I think what was coming after that was this idea of, I think that feeds my passion for professional development, for mentorship, for encouragement, for even community engagement and partnership that assumes the genius of the other, that invites others to participate in the power. That's why I love social innovation, because it goes, how can we do it? Well, let's get together. Let's get together. Having been experienced being not seen or being silenced, I'm like, oh no, no, no. I'm good. I see. I've talked about in at other times, in the Caribbean, it's in small communities, you think about the persons looking out their window and seeing, or greeting, the importance of greeting in our culture. You do not walk into rooms and not say good afternoon, good morning. And if you don't, they know you don't come from here. You greet. And I think it's that sort of like hyper seeing, right? But that's
Mm.
also a part of that. So it's part of what sort of rallied against the silencing in me, coming from a place where it's just common courtesy to see. It's
Mm.
common courtesy, right? And so, and that common courtesy, I think, sort of translates into common social design practice, or what ought to be common in social design practices. The hyper seeing of assets, hyper acknowledgement, hyper inviting. Yeah. I think that's been a signature of my practice, my curatorial practice, my culture production practice, my practice now in leadership, my creative practice. So the hyper seeing and the asking and what else is here, and I invite it to come.
Wow. I feel like I just need to sit with that. Just let that, settle into the body. That was so powerful and profound and just so deep. Hyper seeing your signature. I can definitely co-sign that from the work that I've seen from you. And it's, it reminds me of what I think is so tremendously valuable about what you bring to the world is your approach to the work that you do, the energy, the intention, the presence that you bring to the work that you do. There are many curators, there are many storytellers, there are many, sound or sonic artists, but this deep intention to heal
Mhm.
through the work that you do, the social design, the institution cultivation and building is extremely, extremely valuable, and we need much more of it in the world. There was a quote when I was starting my master's at Yale. You told me about some of your experiences, and I never forgot the quote where you said that someone you were in a classroom and you had answered a question, and the professor said, "Can someone refine that for me or for us?" Right? And so to navigate a space like that for 4 years and be so actively quieted, and then
Mm.
to come out with this. You talked about the people who encouraged you and said, we do see you and we do appreciate who you are, and keep being that. I want you to share a little bit about who those people were, what those, where those that energy came from. And then you spent some time in Mississippi in the deep south. Just kind of take us
Sure,
through
sure, sure.
that angle a bit.
One of the folk, and there's so many, I've been really, really rich with blessings, but Sarah Soleri Goodman was someone that I met in my. It was very interesting, most of my. It was often my sort of non-American professors that sort of enjoyed my writing and said, uh, other professors wanted me to write as an advertisement, 30-second sound bites. And like, this is grammatically correct. Can you process?
And you studied anthropology, correct?
I did American Studies with a minor in cultural anthropology, and I did American Studies because it was intersectional. It was a
Interdisciplinary.
interdisciplinary, degree at the time, right? And I know it's shifted, was relatively new sort of discipline at the time. And I wasn't quite entirely sure exactly what I wanted to do. And so the interdisciplinary space, it allowed me to craft it, gave me some space to create a lane for myself. And the cultural anthropology was a minor. And again, that's again deep looking, but looking internally, looking from a place of power, having a gaze that's not necessarily an external gaze on the folk, but a gaze from the folk on the folk, if that makes sense. Um, you asked me.
You were talking about Sarah Saleri Goodman and how your non-American professors appreciated your writing.
Appreciated writing, appreciated flow, appreciated the thinking, were willing to sort of receive a voice that was different, and not just my voice, but lots of other voices. I wasn't necessarily being treated specially, but I just feel like there was a wider, more dynamic approach to teaching, and a wider, more dynamic approach to cultivating than what was perhaps from my more American professors. Robert Farris Thompson was also very encouraging, was someone who sort of saw and affirmed. But I think I also spent a lot of time off campus with Pan-African movement organizations, the Malcolm X grassroots movement, the Huru movement. And so these are also spaces, places, and people who are giving me analysis, self-determination analysis, land, the primacy of land, recognizing that land is power, culture is power, participating in marches to free Mumia. So this is giving me a broader context for understanding my own experience. And a lot of that has really been foundational to the work that I sort of went on to do in art and culture. And I've been very, very lucky to be able to be at organizations where cultural responsiveness, community engagement, community building was very central to the sort of the art practice and the cultural production sort of ethos. After Yale, I went to Alabama, actually, to the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, and spent some time there thinking about sustainable farming and thinking about community supported agricultural products and projects. I think that was really important, one, because it was a time to be slow and speak slowly and process and be in nature. But it was also a time, again, to see close up what is a practice that gives people power. What does that look like? What is a practice that sort of connects economic development to cultural voice? What does that look like? What does it look like to be in a space where we're being tender to cultural history and preservation, and at the same time inviting people to write futures? What does that look like? And to write futures that they own. What does that look like? I think that was a really important time. And again, brought that to Malcolm X grassroots movement in New York, brought that to Brooklyn, all the different places that I've been and have to be.
I just want to clarify something, because MXG, Malcolm X grassroots movement, was not active in New Haven in the time that I was there. Were they actively recruiting students or actively engaging with students at that time, or did they just kind of exist in the, in the environment?
What it was is that I was also spending perhaps more time with graduate students than undergraduate students. And there was a brother there who was already connected to Malcolm X grassroots movement, who invited me first to the Mumia March in Philadelphia. And we were going to be participating with the delegation from the Malcolm X grassroots movement chapter in New York. So this is how I meet Rashid Shabazz and Monifa Bandele, and Lumumba Bandele, and Asha Bandele, and Dream Hampton, and all these people that I've been really lucky to learn from and have sort of a certain amount of proximity to, and who modeled that genius, that sort of organizing, analysis, self-determination genius to me as well. And modeled it in a way that was highly accomplished, highly focused, that was interrogating and disrupting it, respectability politics at the same time, right? I think it was a very instructive and important time for me. And lots of these people from that moment are still the people in my core circle.
I had to go and look for this quote from what you were saying. So there's those of you, who followed me may know that I started a PhD at Cambridge in 2019. I took a break, but I received an email about a conference happening in Cambridge in June about activist aesthetics. Um, and there's a quote from Emory Douglas, Black Panther. I don't know if you're familiar with his work.
Was.
He wrote the Political Artist Manifesto.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I was really emotional when I got this email because I often quote Tony K. Bambara, the role of the artist is to make revolution irresistible, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I believe, just like you, that, we must use cultural production and creativity and music and all these art forms to liberate ourselves and others. And I just thought this quote was so important, and I had never come across his work before this. So it says, in his Political Artist Manifesto, artist and Black Panther Emory Douglas issues a call to create art that recognizes the oppression of others and challenges the colonization of the imagination. Douglas's vision is for an art practice that is aware of both its instrumental power and its aesthetic dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
It is one among hundreds of global efforts that trouble, occupy, and thrive between the lines that separate art object and protest tool, aesthetic intervention, and activist material. From the radical theater of the Jana Natya Manch in India and Augusto Boal, Brazil, to the docu-poetics of Muriel Rukeyser, USA, and the posters of Medu Art Ensemble in Botswana, the 20th and 21st centuries have been witness to countless visionary interventions that deploy the aesthetic in service of the political.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when I think of aesthetic, our initial kind of definition of aesthetic is visual. But I do believe that there's a sound aesthetic, there's an energetic aesthetic, there's a way to communicate beauty in all these different dimensions. Can you speak to your creative practice during that time? Were you being creative? I know you were singing at Yale. What did it look like for you to be creative as such a young person who was becoming politicized and given broader context for the work that you were doing, your experience, and what you were passionate about?
Sure. I'm going to sort of start maybe on the back end. That this sort of space in between the aesthetic and the tool, it's not a space that can be occupied authentically or powerfully or effectively from contrived. I think the art is coming out of the person's actual experience, right? And it's also not the kind of thing where we want to say to artists, hey, you can only create this didactic stuff. You can only create the propaganda, whether it's proper propaganda or not, that you sort of limit. An artist has to be able to express the full spectrum of experiences, right? So the artist, what most say, sometimes I don't want to be a soldier. Sometimes I just want to be a man. But Umi says, shine your light on the world. Remember that, that line.
You heard that voice? Y'all heard that voice?
That was
that's the tip of the iceberg. Mm-hmm.
But I feel that for me, that was I remember that line, that lyric, because it spoke to why we're doing the work. It's because we feel a love and we strive for our humanity, and it offends and it assaults when we see the dignity of others being suppressed by policy and bullets and things like that, right? And so I think that how was I expressing it? I was expressing what I was seeing and what I was living and what was making me cry and what was making me laugh and what was making me feel cute for the first time, because I had started to wait a second. All these things were a part of what emboldened me to write, to sing, to seek people out and say, hey, can we work, to start the matriarch group with the other women with whom we had been in that sort of performance fellowship. So there's a certain emboldening of your sense of humanity and personal freedom and dignity that then sort of expressed itself gave me license to write a song about police brutality, and gave me license to write a song about somebody touching my body, and gave me license to write a song about spirits coming through to the earth, gave me license. I could be free inside my creativity, free to express my full all the nuances and colors of an experience, right? And I think that that the political analysis, the organizing work, liberated the voice, liberated the writing, liberated. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
I want to continue to move forward. So you left Yale, you went to Alabama, you experienced, life in the South and learned about sustainable agriculture and Black farming. And then you came back to Brooklyn. Was there other experiences in between before came back to New York, let me say?
Sure. I mean, there's been a fair amount of traveling. I'd been to Thailand, I'd been to China, singing, right? And but coming back, and Brooklyn was the base. And I wanted to come back to Brooklyn for two reasons primarily. The political work that I wanted to be doing was based in Brooklyn, and the cultural communities that I wanted to be doing were based in Brooklyn. When I grew up, we came to Brooklyn for Labor Day, right? And at that time, when you lived in the Bronx, you spat out the word Brooklyn. What kind of place is that? But I always remember, true. I love Brooklyn. I also love the Bronx. I always remember I loved being here because the culture was so dense. You'd drive up Nostrand and hear this reggae, hear that soca, see this Rastaman bouncing up the road, and it just felt like a transposed Antigua. But it was culturally familiar. And so I wanted to be here for those reasons. I wanted to soak in myself. I wanted to have ease of access to the organizations and communities doing work that was really inspiring to me. I was very inspired as well by Ife Tayo Cultural Arts Community or Academy that was founded by curator Archer Cunningham and is still active. Naima Oyo is currently their executive director. And I'm calling these names very deliberately. I'm not dropping names just for so. I'm dropping names because I want to identify the people whose genius and whose work, the people whose genius and whose actualization sort of inform me and keep me on course. I'm being very, very deliberate. This is almost like inspiration, ancestral libation. Okay, it's not just FYI. And I want these people to have their props as well. But if Atayo is an organization that has won awards for creating an operational model that was built on sort of integrity, cultural integrity and sustainability, has been recognized by the White House, has been recognized locally, for this model, deliberately did not fundraise for a number of years so that they could really build a strong foundation of doing what we want to do as African people, as a global African people, and building our institution without having to compromise. So these are the kinds of organizations and people and places that I wanted to sort of stay close to and learn about. And became, I think, some of the kinds of places off of which I modeled my own practice. Right?
Wow. Shout out to Ifat Tayo, to Naima, to Fire, Archer Cunningham. Yesune goes there. And anybody who's ever talked to in the last few days knows how much respect and adoration I have for that institution. They serve all of our young people, but I'm particularly grateful for the work that they do with our girls. And as you were speaking about your journey and them, I'm reminded. So yes, Desiree, you and I met when our girls went to school together, right? Yes. And I have watched your trajectory. I see you as such a striking,
we met at Afropolitan. We met at after Afropolitan, the show I curated at Weeksville. That's where we met.
No, I met you before then.
You sure?
We connected before then. I don't know the timeline, but I mean, I knew about you because of MXG. You were a star in MXG, and we may not have, talked or worked together in MXG, but I saw your picture, I heard your name, and then we came across each other in different, cultural environments. And then I feel like after Afropolitan must have been during PS11 or after
Possibly then.
PS11,
Maybe. I'm gonna
maybe,
follow
you know. But I bring that up because, you know, I always say this, I see you as Mother of the Year, such an exemplary example of what it means to be a mother, what it means to be a woman, what it means to shepherd community and cultivate family. And I know that that has taken a lot of work for you to become someone who is so, you know, just comfortably bold in yourself, in your womanness, in your identity. And I would like for you to speak about that journey a bit, because as Black women, as Black girls, the things that we don't get, the treatment that we receive very much impacts the way that we get to show up in the world, and whether or not and how much we get to fulfill our purpose and our dreams. And if you could just speak a little bit to your even your self-worth journey, and that, and becoming, you know, beyond the silencing, but really as a woman, you know, identifying, because this is going to become part of a series for Black girls and Black girl CEOs, something I haven't talked to you about yet, but we'll talk more about it. But I want you to speak a bit about evolving as a woman, from a girl to a woman, and what it meant to really cultivate that self-worth to the place that you are now.
So interesting that you talk about Black CEOs for girls. I'm going to start first. My great grandmother, Catherine Emma Eli Delsall, got on a boat and with her three children from Dominica to Antigua, and she was a trader woman, and when she came to Antigua, she established a store, she established a shop. Her husband had passed away, and so she set out to make life for her children and herself in this new country, and did so. And my mother often talks about how it's that shop, her granny's shop, that you know, filled in the gaps for them. And I think that I'm absolutely living a legacy of bravery, living a legacy of vision, living a legacy of a sort of value for wealth and abundance and resources, living a legacy of faith. And those stories about that woman, about her daughter, my grandmother Doris Blackman, who also was an institution leader, who was a principal. My father's mother, Avril, who was the first female pharmacist in Antigua. There's a lot of sort of women moving forward in my bloodline and in the stories. You and I have talked about stories as programming. So hearing these stories and what sort of stands up and activates in my spirit.
They're literally giving me chills hearing your ancestors' stories right now. So
Oh,
please
and
continue.
I'm giving you the truncated versions, right? My own mother, who I often say our dining room table was often filled with the books for her studies. She was at night school most of my childhood, getting this degree, that degree, this law degree. Converting her American law degree to a Commonwealth law degree because she wanted to practice internationally, taking the bar one time, passing it. Boom, people take the bar 3 and 4 times to pass it.
10. I've heard
Let
of
me
someone taking it 10 times.
Easy and brilliant people, but those are the kinds of heads that I come from. And so I think my mother is fifth girl in her family, so we have a lot of women in the family, ambassador this, principal that. Just they're bold, they're bold, they're self-assured, they're mothers, but they're bosses. And that's what I saw around me, right? And I think, again, that's why my spirit kind of rallied. You say I ugly, you say I sound funny. I'm like, you know where I come from, you know my people. I think even before I had that conscious thought, my DNA,
Mm.
my Ori was like, that's not the truth. That's not the reality, right? And I think there's also, women are magic. This idea of producing things from nothing again and again and again and again. The idea of water, and that there's no living thing, that water as the precedent for all life, right? And water as this thing that when well, is in constant motion, and is when not well is when it's stagnant. I think that has been understanding of myself as a and that element and relationship with that element, and even the story that I told about my great grandmother traveling over water, that water has been an incredible metaphor for me. Has been an incredible healing tool for me, has been an incredible sword for me. Water. Water. I think, and what do you think about? You asked about self worth. You look at you. Would you? What is the first reflector? Is it not? Right? And that self worth being also a journey of being like self responsibility. Here's what I did. Here's what I did, what I ought not to have done, or what I did with what information I had then. But here's how what I would do, and looking clearly and seeing the truth about the circumstance, the truth about yourself, the truth about your power. See the truth and move. And a fair amount, I think, that we all need of gentleness and forgiveness. Gentleness, wield that gentleness like a sword, you know? Wield that gentleness like a sword, like I'm going to keep clearing my pathways with the gentleness. And me also respecting my gentleness. So like, oh, I'm soft spoken, or what? No, 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 no. In fact, what part of what the gentleness commands is thoughtfulness, is the quietness to understand, the quietness to feel, the quietness that sometimes is necessary for communicating. So recognizing that, I don't come with a big stick if you don't look well. That's not my power. My power is this other thing that also part sees, that also gets things done. And it takes all kinds. Come back to the intersection. It takes all kinds.
Let me just call on Yemuja, right quick, as you're talking about water. I felt all of that. I have a deep relationship with the water as well. And I just want to acknowledge our Yemuja, the water queen mother, and her presence in this her energy,
Absolutely.
and this lifelines in this conversation. Wow. Okay. So do you feel then that your confidence, coming from your lineage and the knowledge of your lineage and of your history, was it then?
Can I ask you 1 second?
Sure.
Are we going to cut, edit, pause, anything?
We will cut and edit some things.
Okay, so can we just pause for 2 minutes? Because I now have people moving about and I would like to
Give her a kiss for me. Go ahead. Handle it. Handle what you got to handle.
a group of the people.
Okay.
Give me 1 second. I'm sorry about that.
It's okay.
Can you guys hurry? That's okay. I want to.
We're just going to mute Desiree and take some deep breaths. You could just wave when you're ready. Okay. I might want to read a little bit more of her bio while we wait. I don't think I got to speak on her being a member of multiple performance collectives, including Matriarch, the Women's Sound Healing Ensemble, SEA. She's also currently producing 2 independent projects, We Fly Home, a visual sound poem that narrates an immigrant journey from longing to self-ownership, and I Honor Myself, a 4-song EP exploring many of the topics that have proven to be thematic in her life, values, and work. Rebelling, healing, loving. Her heart driving is often shining and exposed like a river or a blade. Wow. She also has more than 10 years integrating resources and networks to develop programs for youth, both in and out of schools, as well as a strong background in liberation pedagogy, community empowerment, and leadership enhancement. She was a participant of the Lincoln Center Educators Training Institute and a proud recipient of the Amy Rossborough Fellowship for Service. Wave at me if you're ready, Desiree. Okay. Bring.
Sorry about that.
Not a problem. Not a problem. So I want to, okay, so I think I was asking the question about confidence and whether you felt that knowledge was sufficient to give you the confidence to navigate the things that, women often get caught up in, the struggles that we get caught up in right?
I want to
Whether
quickly also say is that a number of the institution builders that I have admired and have had the opportunity to work with have been women. And so seeing that
Mhm.
really modeled has been really important. I'm thinking about Marta Marina Vega, I'm thinking about Choir, Archer Cunningham, and institutional leaders, Radia Harper at the Brooklyn Museum, Maureen Knighton when I was at 651 Arts, again, Monifa, Matt Bandele, people, and my peers, the lots of the people that with whom I was organizing, Malika Harris, uh, Meron, a lot of people who were active, Crystal Whaley, Emmy Award-winning producer, sisters.
Mm.
And so I think speaking to the point of it being so important for each of us to live inside our leadership and our power, because who's to say who that sort of full actualization of voice and self and inhabiting of your body and your work is inspiring and teaching.
So, what would you say to a 16-year-old, for instance, a teenage girl who is struggling to embrace her confidence, who's struggling to embrace her value, who's being told from different, experiences, sources that she's less than, she's not good enough. A lot of us get caught up in even, just the experience of romance and relationships can be such a destabilizing experience for a lot of our girls. I'm curious what you would say to, a teenager who has big dreams but is struggling to really recognize her power.
I think joy, like where is that joy? Where is that place that you come to repeatedly? Uh, what is that thing that you do with ease? What is that thing that is home to you? And really sort of helping to shift a narrative that sort of identifies that as, in fact, all you need. That
Mm.
you have agency wherever you go, and that thing, that element of your joy, that element of what is home to you, that element of the the effect that you have easily, that is actually, in fact, the what is being called from you, what is being requested by the universe of you. And that and I think thinking also about identifying for them who else they are affecting, who else is looking at them, who else is watching them. Because I think that affirms an understanding of being part of a collective, a critical part of a collective, right?
Mhm.
And where do you have power and influence, and multiplying that and amplifying that and really and mastering that. I think that's really important.
Okay, so let's come into your career. What
Mhm.
was your first kind of like big break, your first opportunity, working in the cultural development, social innovation space, coming out of college, coming back to New York?
I think Urban Word was an important space, but I think
Girl?
Urban Word NYC, which was a space teaching young people different kinds of literacy through hip hop, through poetry, through prose, through journalism, and I managed that program across the city. Uh, and met a number of the poets and thinkers whom I still adore, Roger Bonaire Agar being one of those people, Trinidadian poet, author, um, genius himself. Um, I think, but going to Brooklyn Museum, I often say Brooklyn Museum is where I grew up as a professional,
Mm,
because Brooklyn Museum is where I was invited to participate in strategic planning, strategic thinking, and to see my work in the context of that. I often talk about programs as institutional advancement, that the work, so being able to, I think it gave me an opportunity to apply that intersectional thinking beyond my role and to mission, right? And to mission both of the institution, but and then and impact, and in thinking about integrity, the institution's integrity to its stated mission, into institution's integrity
mm,
to relationship building, and
mm,
and the systems and internal collaboration processes that allow an organization to do that effectively, consistently,
mm.
excellently. I think that Brooklyn and sort of see where where the fallings were, but I think that was an important uh, in terms of like the tools of institution building. Brooklyn Museum was an important stop on that journey. At the Brooklyn Museum, I had the opportunity to curate Target First Saturdays, and I'm so grateful. People still to death. It was when there when it made a turn, and Target First Saturdays started to talk to us. First Saturdays started to invite us, and we started to see ourselves reflected in the programming, in the material, in the music, and who was being present. That's when I felt like I could go to that place, that place was talking to me. Uh, and so I'm super proud of that. And I'm amazed by the way that that work has multiplied as well. And it's still a community institution.
Can you speak a little bit more specifically about that, about your work at Brooklyn Museum and how you helped to shift that focus, what specifically you did to bring in, more energy that would connect more meaningfully with the community?
Sure. I mean, and Brooklyn Museum has the Sackler Institute, which is their sort of feminist wing. And I remember I had to say to someone, we were thinking about programs to celebrate that space, and I'd mentioned uh, this Black British woman, and someone said to me, "Well, this one is about women," and it was so simple. I said to them, "Some of the women are Black, and some of the Blacks are women." And so I think it was such a simple thing, but it sort of helped people sort of recognize their misogynoir, help people, and they may not have had the language at the time, but sort of really was me disrupting exclusion, me disrupting this narrative of feminism that didn't include people of color. When again, the language was not there for that, but being at places like the Malcolm X grassroots movement and Kokrobite Institute in Ghana gave me the courage to be able to be the lone voice saying those things in those rooms and shifting again the shape and color and voice and cadence of those programs in such a way as to hold the door open for others. And I see myself very often in these spaces at places like Yale, at Lincoln Center. I find I'm trying to figure out how can I hold the door open for others. Again, that this idea of leadership that invites. How do I hold the door open and make sure that other perspectives are represented here? If you're going to have a Black History Month program, the DJ can be Black, huh? We're going to have um, a program that explores Latinx cultures. We're going to ask people, if none of us on the team identify from that space, we're going to ask. We're not going to just sit up and define by ourselves what that should be. Our practice is going to include community partnership and community instruction. We're going to say, you tell me, you lead this. And that's how the institution becomes a people's institution. That's how the institution becomes a people's institution. And also, I think it's, as a woman, as an immigrant, as a Black person, being able to also, well, I am not Asian, or I am not LGBTQ. So like, I can't, from my the perspective, right? I know some things, whatever perspective, whatever identity spheres we occupy, we don't occupy them all. And so creating a practice that constantly acknowledges both our privileges and our marginalizations, and is constantly sort of weaving in and out. When do I need to lean in? When do I need to make space for my Asian LGBTQ sister to come in and be the one that tells us what we need to be doing? When do I need to lean back, lean out, and have, a Desi person talk about Asian American history and complicate what is the narrative around Asian American sort of experiences as well? When do I need to lean in and lean out, and understanding that is the way I need to occupy leadership, so that the self-determination I want for myself, others can see it and experience it as well.
Wow. So just talk about a couple more places that I know you were at the Schomburg. I think we talked about, so Urban Word is when you worked with the youth. I know you did some work with youth.
With the youth, Boys Hope, Girls Hope was also a sort of direct service with youth organizations. They wanted leadership development with a cultural lens, and so that was more holding the door open for others to come and do what they do and do their work.
Mhm.
And I think from there, that moment shifted to Schomburg, to the Studio Museum in Harlem, uh, a moment working with this small um, equity investment firm, and then recognizing that I wanted to have a more ecological perspective and
Mhm.
practice. I was less interested by this point in working with individual organizations and more interested in trends, in cultural equity, in resources, and specifically being able to create infrastructure, structural shift, structural resourcing that would allow for some of these values to become more normalized across the landscape. And again, invite smaller organizations, invite organizations led by women, invite organizations led by immigrant, it giving them access to resources that they would not have had typically. And so it was in Brooklyn Arts Council being a place that is funded largely by government resources for, and so recognize a responsibility around equity and resourcing equitably felt like a place to practice that.
Do you remember a moment when you made that shift, or the moment, if there was one, where you made that shift into thinking about ecologies and wanting to work beyond just one institution?
I think the shift was always happening in the sense that everywhere we went, most of the places I was, we were thinking about the work we were doing, the creative production work we were doing, and trying to be responsive to conditions in the world, right? At the Caribbean Cultural Center African Diaspora Institute, I created a program called Transforming the Temple, which was about taking programs and this annual sort of festival directly into housing projects that to talk about uh, healing, wellness, but doing so in a way that was culturally responsive, doing so with Spanish speaking practitioners and artisans, doing so with bringing our food, doing so that spoke to the sort of the cultural healing practices along with the modern medical practices, making sure and identifying the body as sacred, as that temple, right? And because we recognize that in East Harlem, you had some of the highest rates of obesity, some of the highest rates of asthma, some of the highest rates of diabetes. So seeing the cultural institution position and as a responsibility to responding to these community conditions, right? And so I think because having the work was always sort of looking out at the world, is what I'm trying to say. And so I think it was always kind of poised to then go, okay, here's what I've learned about what are the limitations and strengths and opportunities of doing this work at this institution and that institution and that institution. And now I have I see some through lines. I kind of understand where the interventions need to be in terms of funding and or capacity and or sort of clarity around strategic planning. Because I've been to a couple of places and I'm seeing some of these same things over and over again. Does anybody who is at some of these foundations and councils, who else is seeing that? And who else is seeing it from the particular perspective that I have? Who else is seeing it from the particular perspective that I have? And who else uh, is bringing to it the creative practice I've had, the spiritual practices I've had, the cultural practices and experiences that I've had, right? The political practices I've had and principles I've had. Um, and I don't know that I am special. I'm going to say that. I'm special. Just
Yes,
like
of
we're
course.
special. Each one of us is special with a particular thing that we have to bring. And I know that because prior to my coming to Brooklyn Arts Council, there was no social justice investment strategy. There was no wellness studio. All those things, these are the things that I brought to Brooklyn Arts Council, and that if anybody could have and should have done them before, they would have been there already. But it was necessary for me to be there to make them happen. And so that's why I said, okay, I see these through lines, and maybe some of these things should have been solved by now. But the fact that I see them, the hyper seeing, right, is now my responsibility to to address.
So I know of very few people who have kind of, experienced the landscape of Brooklyn cultural production at the institutional level. And you have touched on this a bit, but I would like to ask you to speak a little bit to what you see, even if there was like three characteristics that you could mention about, the cultural arts landscape, the cultural curation landscape across thinking about institutions you've worked with, and just what you see beyond them. How would you describe the landscape in New York specifically? What is distinct about, the way that we advance culture through institution building, and particularly for people of color?
What is distinct about the way we advance culture through institution building for people of color?
Take your time.
I think what I see in Brooklyn is that a lot of sort of cultural, a lot of folk who are doing cultural services and cultural work are doing it for children. There's a strong youth development focus on the cultural work in Brooklyn. That's important. I do think that there and a lot of the parents, often the mothers, are sort of shuttling children to and fro. I think there is a real hunger um, and dearth for cultural participation, cultural programs for adults, language learning, for instance, um, wellness, um, anthropology, for instance. Uh, I think that they were doing so much work, and often it's the women doing so much work because it's work for the children, that I think that somehow there's a gap. There can sometimes be a bit of a generational gap. And so I've been really interested at Brooklyn Arts Council in developing a fund, or including in our Creative Equations Fund, a fund for mothering and or caretaking artists, so that people who are doing the the work of sort of strengthening the next generation or caring for the previous generation get space, time, and resources to invest in themselves, invest in their own learning, to invest in their creative practice. I think that is a really important space. I think that again, in terms, I'm going to answer the question slightly different. A lot of institutions who are doing a lot of work are doing it. This is common, maybe not just to people of color, but under capacity. And so when everyone is stretched, it can be a real challenge to innovation and professional development slash learning. And I think that also requires resource intervention, and training intervention, so that we look up at, we don't have people doing so much work delivering and implementing. They haven't been to a conference. There's no budget for to send folk to a conference. There's no budget for people to have time to think about a presentation that they should present at a conference. There's doing a lot of delivering, a lot of heavy work, a lot of, and we need to think about capacity to be able to maintain the genius of the people who are working in these institutions, so that they can continue to serve at a high level, or not be just sort of referencing what was said 5 or 10 years ago, but actually be in a constant practice of innovating our practice, innovating our institutions, innovating our funding models, innovating our program delivery. I think the capacity piece it is about budget and salaries, but it's also about risk capital, experimentation capital, innovation capital, and wellness capital, so that institutions can sustain themselves. We know a number of institutions outside of our communities that are 50 years old or 100 years old or 200 years old. But lots of our organizations run 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. The sustainability piece, when the people who are working at the institutions can't sustain themselves or their imagination or their genius, the institution eventually will also. And so I think it's really important, that capacity piece, and us rethinking about our budgets, our revenue models, our sustainability plans, such that we budget for imagination, that we budget for divination, that we budget for strategic planning and retreats and things like that. That we budget.
Innovation. Yo, I feel like I can sit here with you for 4 hours, so I'm
And
gonna
so
do my best to
we
cover
don't
that.
have that time. And we don't have that time.
Based on what you said, though, I have to plug Ubuntu Agile, our methodology for helping organizations cultivate their genius within and without.
That's right.
So to learn more about Ubuntu Agile, go to portalx.space and hit up team at Nora Labs. So this brings me to what we're doing together, this DEP.
Yes.
And this is where we're gonna kind of bring everything together. So, Brooklyn Arts Council is a client of Ubuntu Agile of Nora Labs, right? We've helped you guys to cultivate your team through the retreat. We've helped you to kind of vision and strategize on building this DEP, and following your vision and your leadership. It's been really exciting and really an honor to be a part of this work and this project. And so I want you to speak a bit about where the idea for the DEP came from, right? Because we've talked about all of what you've seen across the landscape. And at a certain point, you said, we need a digital platform, to advance this work. I want you to speak a bit about that. And I believe, the way I understand it, it kind of is inspired from your framework of creative equations, right? So it's creative experiences, creative ecologies, and creative equations, right? Please speak about that foundation and how you've kind of, developed the vision for the DEP.
Sure. And thank you for that question. I'll start in the back end with the CEs. One of the things
is that part of the shorthand, CE cubed? Okay.
The CQs. When I was invited to join Brooklyn Arts Council, right? I was asked to develop like a program paradigm for the organization. The organization was doing some granting and doing some cultural heritage work and doing some arts and education, and folk were doing them in their separate silos, and it didn't quite make sense. Like, what is this organization, right? And the organization was talking about itself as empowering artists and thinking a lot about capacity building. I said, okay, what's happening here? I could see, okay, we're working on a couple of different levels, and we call those, the first one, creative experiences. And that having everything to do with art making, art teaching, art learning, the work itself, the art, the core piece. Why? Because art is powerful, right? Why was that? Like, why was it important to think about creative experiences? Because art is powerful. And then from there, it's like, okay, well, if we sort of shored up the capacity for art making and art learning and art wellness and art healing, if we shored up that the art is happening, the learning is happening, the healing is happening, what else is needed? Is that, well, artists and communities thrive when they're connected to one another. So we need to shore up the creative ecologies. We need to shore up the pipelines and the access points and the entry points that make sure artists have the resources they need, whether that's healthcare or opportunities, and that communities have access to artists, right? Because artists don't just need, artists have to give, right? And creativity has to give. So there's the creative experiences, creative ecologies. And at that point, if we're connected, right, and we're listening to one another and we're working together, and artists have healthcare and schools have art programs, it's like, okay, what problems should we be solving? That brings us to creative equations, because I strongly believe that whatever you're trying to solve for in the world, climate change, gender-based violence, whatever you're trying to solve for, if you don't have a creative element, a creative asset, a creative institution, an artist, a piece of, you don't have a creativity involved in your equation is not complete. You're not going to have the most holistic, most sustainable solve, right? And so creative experiences, creative ecologies, creative equations became the paradigm that sort of had been encouraging Brooklyn Arts Council to think about spheres of impact. And frankly, I think that can be applied to most any any creative cultural institution that wants to exist in the world as a part of creating the futures that we want for ourselves, for our communities, our local communities and our global communities. And we know that they're very. What movements can you think of that didn't have the artists involved? Right, so it's quite apropos. It's historically appropriate and futuristically appropriate, right? That being said, one of the things that was already percolating when I arrived at the Brooklyn Arts Council was this idea of a resource guide that would match and map and visualize information and data and sort of help artists connect to creative resources. And the title that was being used and that was still sort of using as a placeholder is dynamic engagement portal. But it began to evolve from this just this sort of dynamic resource guide when the pandemic hit. And I'd mentioned that Brooklyn Arts Council does arts and education. We do programs for K through 12 and seniors all throughout the borough. And that work is not just arts engagement. That work is also workforce development. It's employing artists. And so then when the pandemic happened and schools were closed, we had this bevy of artists that had been counting on us for their income, counting on us who do teaching artist work, and a significant portion of their income was the work that the Arts Council was giving them, right? And so I thought, okay, realize this is a critical piece here. How else can we help artists generate income? What can we do if part of the role of the Arts Council is, again, building capacity for financial thriving, right, across the creative sector? What else can we create? What else can we do? How else can we get markets and audiences and investors to these artists? Especially at this time. And so this is when the content library notion came up. What first of all was the first notion was an e-commerce, sort of connecting artists to digital markets, and then we thought about also their content as well. And so now we have this dynamic engagement portal. That the scope is beyond just this resource guide. It's where we're connecting artists to resources, trainings, opportunities, and one another. There's also this idea of monetizing, helping artists monetize their content and their services. And finally, through the content library, and then finally, the sort of civic investment piece, the citizen patron piece. And Lily, thank you for bringing that word citizen to the thinking that we're doing with this final sort of giving platform. In some ways, is a sort of simple way to sort of help people see what we're imagining with this portion. But I think that this giving platform, this civic investment piece, is highly Brooklyn, highly Arts Council, and distinguishing in this is the thing that distinguishes it, because you can find content on Instagram, you can find content on YouTube, but what we're counting on, what we're betting on, is being in a place like Brooklyn, being in community with other visionaries, being in community with other activists and organizers who are interested in being able to have a direct say in how and make a direct investment in Brooklyn communities, who are interested in being able to say, I want my funds, I want to give X amount of funds to this artist, X amount of funds to this community institution, whether it's this shelter or this school or this community center, or I want to give X amount of funds to this neighborhood fund, Brooklyn Arts Council, and you all take those funds and create some sort of cultural intervention, arts activation to address a particular issue or to support an anchor community institution in the neighborhoods that need it the most. And so the piece is investing in artists as a means of investing in Brooklyn, and really empowering people with the opportunity to directly determine how their funds can be a part of that. That I think is the promise, one of the distinction promises and of the dynamic engagement portal, inviting people to into this new model of how communities can run, of how communities can work, of how communities can be funded, and about how art can be activated to address community issues, and how community members can participate in setting that agenda. That
So
is a doing with the dynamic engagement portal. Go ahead.
incredibly exciting, incredibly powerful. I just want to hear a bit more about your long-term vision for the portal.
Mhm.
What do you see it doing 10 years, 50 years, 100 years from now for Brooklyn?
Sure. I love the 100 year from now. First of all, it's sort of beginning as a seed with the Brooklyn Arts Council, but we do imagine this work happening in consortium, in partnership with other institutions. So again, that connectedness, that interconnectedness, that intersectionality, right? That partnership piece, that sort of seeing of the multiple assets on the landscape and how we can work together. We do see the project functioning in consortium. We also see the project, when we talk about connecting artists to resources and opportunities, I'm really excited for elected officials to be among those partners. And so when we talk about pipelines to power, that we're able to place through this platform artists in residencies with city council district offices and state senate offices, that this becomes a place where people seek out and achieve those kinds of partnerships. Really interested in there being both local small businesses and larger corporations that are part of the community, of stakeholders on the dynamic engagement portal. And so through this platform, we're able to sort of see us facilitating professional development. We're able to see workforce development because we're able to peer artists and arts organizations in residency with businesses. That might mean anything from graphic design services to, uh, strategic planning facilitation, because the companies recognize that they want to have a more creative perspective, or HR departments wanting to build culture and teams with creative experiences, and that people are coming here to find those resources, because Brooklyn Arts Council and other arts councils throughout the city, throughout the country, have vetted, have trained, and have sort of set this cadre of creators up to be able to make these contributions to their communities, again, in the nonprofit space, in the for-profit space, and in the elected space. Really, that we're creating a model and a hub, a tool for cultural intervention, for justice, for wellness, for joy, for beauty, all of these that pieces that are necessary for everyone to sort of live in communities that are sustainable and dignified and healthy.
Wow. Okay. What does Black liberation mean to you?
Black liberation means to me Black laughter, Black tears, running free, 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 free. Black liberation means to me Black safety. Black liberation means to me Black birth happening without threat. Black liberation means to me land, green land, fresh water. Black liberation means to me care. Black liberation means to me Black children being safe. Black liberation means to me Black beauty being respected and honored, Black families. And Black liberation to me means Black nations all across the globe working in concert with one another to reconnect, to invest, to remember. Yeah, Black liberation means broadband access. Black
Shots
community
fired.
countries. No, for real. It means broadband access so that we can participate participate in these new economies.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
Formerly colonized nations don't continue to stay in sort of financially dejected positions because we don't have infrastructure, because we're still paying reparations to colonizers.
Mm. Ooh, the
Come on.
bullets. I was not ready for the bullets flying. Okay, what are three things or two things, one to three things that you wish more people understood about you?
I've stopped wishing for people to understand. It's now for me to understand.
It's not for you to understand?
It's now for me to understand
Okay.
and to integrate in my action and my ability. And I think I understand. I understand.
Okay.
I they don't have to understand. Don't believe me, just watch.
Just watch. Ooh. Any books that changed your life that you feel like every teenage black girl should watch, should read?
I love this one comes to mind all the time. I love Alice Walker's Temple of My Familiar.
Mm.
I've loved Tony Craven Barr's The Seabirds Are Still Alive. I love a Queen of Fua's Sacred Woman. It's more than three. Mm, uh, Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon is so magical, and it's
Mm.
so metaphorical. I do. Um, wow. And Tazaki, there's a book called Women of the African Ark.
Mm.
Remember finding that in the library as a kid, and I kept on borrowing it and borrowing it and borrowing it and borrowing it, maybe like 10, 11, 12. And it had poetry from ancient Egypt, it had Caribbean, Jamaican patois, it had a Black American, it had British, it had the whole span. I felt like I remember reading it, maybe even like 10 or 11, being like, and I felt like I saw myself. Whereas here we were only getting a certain narrative of blackness, and as a Caribbean person, I had empathy for it, but I wasn't seeing myself fully reflected. This book that gave me the global span, Women of the African Ark,
I love
that was important to me. And then I rediscovered this book 20 years later at some sort of book swap, and I
that.
had this reflexive, and I grabbed it from the person
Wow.
because I was like, oh my God, this book is where I first got this sense of expanse of Black womanhood, and
Mm.
that I was inside of it and it was inside of me.
Mm.
Very important book, Women of the African Ark.
With all of this work that you do and the pipelines of power and building creative ecologies, how do you take care of yourself? What does your self care practice look like? And how do you ensure that you get to keep showing up as your best self?
My self care practice ebbs and flows, but I'm making new commitments. And so, music, singing, quietness, nature, water, drinking water, um, vitamins, going away, going home, um, other women, the company of other women. I've never been a person that's like, oh, women are so this and women are so. I have my relationships with women have been so nurturing and healing and inspiring to me. So the company of women has been really, really important, and has been uh, a safe space and a nourishing space for me. So returning to the women again and again, returning to the women, and I recognize that even the performance and creative ensembles that I've been a part of, co-founding, it's been all women ensembles, and that was not done deliberately. Uh,
Mm.
but that has been consistent in the work. So I'm super grateful for the women, for the blood, for the red, 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 red blood.
Cool. Okay.
Mhm.
How can people find you? And what kind of services, offerings, how somebody wants to take advantage of your genius, how can they connect with you, and how do you support institutions?
People who would like to take advantage of my greenness can find Desiree Gordon on Instagram, Omishade Desiree, Omisade, Omishade. And Lola, Day, you can feel free to correct my pronunciation. It's a Yoruba word that means water makes the crown. Omishade Desiree is my Instagram page. I won't apologize for saying stay tuned on some other things like the website, because we've been busy.
Mhm.
But know that that website is forthcoming, and that will be a place where you can find music, where you can request consultation services, especially if for folk who are interested in building funding strategies and are interested in figuring out how to do that equitably, are interested in figuring out what tools to use, are interested in figuring out how to design their process in such a way that creates access. Have really enjoyed being able to give those services to peers in the field, and looking forward to doing that more. Um, and or sort of sound wellness facilitation practices, the same. Really excited about doing that work, and doing that work more, and learning more in concert with peers in the field.
Thank you, Desiree. Thank you all who have joined us for this conversation. I trust that you enjoyed it and you got so much out of it. If you did, share it with somebody who needs to hear the magical genius of Desiree Gordon. If you would like more Black genius and more of the curated beauty and glory that we provide on our platforms, you can go to norpress.org/join. You can also go to portalx.space. We love you, appreciate you, and just sprinkling stardust for you to continue to evolve and thrive in your Black genius.
Thank you for your discipline, consistency, vision, daring, bravery in doing this work and making space for others. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. See y'all soon. Deuces.